Welcome to Point Blank, brought to you by Fitz Roofing. I am Brandon Strange, joined by ESPN Houston's Joel Blank at the press box. Joel, welcome in. The Rockets are moving on to the second round, and they will face the Lakers. Obviously, it took a little longer than they had anticipated, but they finally made it through, and so now we get one of the two big matchups because they're going to have to face a murderer's row of teams to get to the finals. They have to defeat the Lakers in this round and probably the Clippers in the next round. So let's just get right to it. Where do you see the biggest advantages for the Rockets in this series?
Well, first of all, Brandon, I think an advantage for the Rockets might be what you just talked about in having this series go a little longer with the Thunder, simply because of the Russell Westbrook factor. If Russell would have sat out the entire series, it would have gone by quickly, and then they would have started against the Lakers. You really would have had a huge problem because you'd be juggling a different kind of rhythm and tempo when Russ is on the floor versus when he's not, and how players play and adjust to the fact that they got used to playing small ball with James and James alone, and they knew the different positions to be on the court and where they needed to be on breaks and things. Russ plays a different style of play, as we all know, and that could have been a huge factor if they didn't get a couple of dry runs against playoff competition. Now they come in, and that's a big strength for them because they come in with an advantage at the guard position. LeBron's the best guard in the series, arguably along with James. But if Russ is healthy and Russ is your other guard, advantage over every other Lakers guard, and that includes if Rondo comes back or anybody else they throw out there, because Danny Green looks like he's ready for the scrap heap. And you look at Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who's stealing money and hasn't been able to do enough. Their guard play has been absolutely awful, and that's why LeBron has to carry so much of the load, and they miss Avery Bradley, who's not walking through the door anytime soon. So when you talk about a Rockets team that can start with James and Russ and then can add complementary pieces like even Eric Gordon, who's playing better, but the fact that the young guys, McLemore and House, have been giving you energy and defense and filling a role, I think that the Rockets have a huge advantage in the backcourt, and that's something that they're going to have to capitalize on because on the flip side, there's a big advantage for the Lakers up front.
Okay, well, let's get to some of those advantages for the Lakers. And before we talk about those weaknesses for the Rockets, why don't you give us a word from our video sponsors at Fitz Roofing?
We love Fitz Roofing. They're dedicated to SportsMap and ESPN 97.5, even more dedicated to the people of Houston, Texas. And they do so by proving it, by putting out deals that you can't get anywhere else. Look, they do free, no-obligation inspections for anything that you have going on with your roof, whether it be for your business or your family. All you got to do is call them, 832-521-3001. They come to you, tell you what they can do, and then they go back on their way. You want them to come back. They do absolutely fantastic work. They have the best warranties in the business using the best products, and they're all here in Houston for you. It's Fitz Roofing, making a difference one home at a time.
Joel, so obviously there's going to be a big disparity between these two teams as they face one another in the playoffs. One team is built on size, the other team is built on quickness and offensive ability. So where do you see the weaknesses with the Rockets as compared to the Lakers?
Well, unlike the Thunder, who had Steven Adams and some complementary pieces that were okay, now you're playing a team with dominant big men, starting with Anthony Davis. And Anthony Davis on his tiptoes is better than anybody that the Rockets can throw at him on the offensive and defensive glass, let alone trying to stop him offensively when he's either facing the basket or on the post. And whatever P.J. Tucker can do, he still has to worry about Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee and all the 7-footers the Lakers are going to throw at him. And then also don't forget LeBron is a bigger than average guard that is playing in that lineup. Kyle Kuzma big as well. Rockets are going to have to play way bigger than their statistics show in terms of their height, and they're going to have more weight as well because the weight's going to be carried by the Lakers up front. They're going to expose Houston on the low block. Don't forget about the fact that Dwight Howard's going to have an axe to grind, and he's going to want to get in there and mix it up a little bit too. But the Lakers are going to be physical. They're going to be aggressive defensively, and on both sides of the basketball, they're going to have to rebound, do the Rockets, or they're going to get grossly out-rebounded and have a huge disadvantage in this series.
How do the Rockets counteract that? How do you counteract when you're just really out-heighted, I guess, for lack of a better term?
So I think there's a couple different ways that the Rockets can try and use it to their advantage. That is, force the Lakers to take a lot of threes. One, they're not a good three-point shooting team anyway, but a lot of threes result in long rebounds. If the Rockets get long rebounds, size doesn't matter, and they get out and play what they want to play, which is transition basketball, small ball at a fast pace, and a bigger team is going to be not as fleet of foot, and they're going to be on their heels. If the Rockets don't force the Lakers into those shots and they let them get into a half-court set and they let them get to the post and to the elbows and inside the paint, that is going to be doomsday for a Rockets team that just is grossly undersized and undermatched, and that's where the Rockets are really going to have issues.
You mentioned Dwight Howard, and we know the history between James Harden and Dwight Howard. Do you predict that we'll see a James Dwight incident in the series?
I think there might be some mix-ups. I think there might be a couple of times where they go nose to nose. Simply put, it's not going to be the Chris Paul, James Harden fake love fest where either guy was afraid to say anything to the other guy, and they would talk to the officials about the other player, but they weren't going to actually go toe-to-toe, face-to-face. In this situation, there's enough history and enough bad blood that Dwight, because he's not a very needed and relied upon cog in the Lakers' wheel, is going to be a guy that's going to go in there, and if he mixes it up with James, and if they get into it, well, advantage Lakers, because either it's going to be psychological with James and he doesn't do well with those situations as he's shown in the past, or if it gets physical, the Lakers would gladly trade Dwight Howard for James Harden in a double ejection situation. So I think that Dwight, who has been known in his later days of his career to be a guy that isn't afraid to mix it up and can be vocal and demonstrative because he isn't going to be one of the two most counted on players on the Lakers, he could be that guy, and if James isn't careful, he could be the guy that takes the Rockets out of this series if he doesn't keep his level-headedness about him and just look past him into bigger picture, bigger goals, bigger things that he has to worry about.